book,
Yes, sir.
because the next chapter that we're looking at is talking about education. And one of the things that you already talked about was, well, you said from the cradle to the grave, and I'm thinking from school to prison pipeline.
Right.
Talk a little bit about education and why that's a failure.
It's a failure because the first day we come into school, they start teaching us about George Washington. They teach us everything that we need to know about their culture, nothing about our culture. When DeSantis gave his concession speech and
Mm,
threw his weight behind Trump, the first thing he said was, we have to teach a classical education.
mm,
We have to save our civilization. So, what they plan to do, they want to teach a classical education to Black children because we are the majority of the students who are currently enrolled in school. So, even if they're not in power, they can continue to be in power because they're in power over our brain. As a man
mm.
thinketh, so is he. So if we think that white supremacy is the way, we're going to implement white supremacy based on our education, and we'll keep their civilization going, even if they're not here to tell us to do it. And that's the problem with education. We have to have an education that's totally independent from them and teach our children what they need to know. And our beginning did not start with slavery.
Mm,
That's right. Beyond the
right.
plantation, beyond the plantation.
That's right. And when you're talking about education, the educational system is really even failing their children today. When you look at America, it's falling further and further behind other industrialized nations. And so when you think of education and what we call this high tech, moving into this high tech society,
Right.
and where our schools are, many of our schools, some of them don't even have computers, don't
Right.
even have proper internet access. I just heard a program yesterday where they were talking about redlining, um redlining me in the area of your being able to even access a strong internet connection.
Right.
This,
Right.
what future do we have if we can't even learn how to navigate through a computer?
We have to remember that employment is a scarce commodity. And if I can eliminate the competition for my children at the educational level, then my
Mm,
children don't have to compete with other children. And that's one of the reasons why they always miseducate us because they don't want us to compete with their children on in the employment reality. A lot of times, if you can, they already know who's going to go to jail based on whether they can read or write at the third grade, I think it is. It's either third or the fifth grade. So they
mm,
make sure that we can't read or write, so that we'll end up in jail. Now I think it's the Navy is permitting people to enter without a high school diploma. That's very recent. I think I read it yesterday or today.
wow.
Was they need bodies to go and fight these wars they're getting ready to start. So now you used to have a high school diploma to get in. Now they'll accept you without a high school diploma to get into the military. And the people who don't get high school diplomas are the ones that end up in prison. And they know this. And that's the reason why they're making sure that we don't have proper education so they can fill their prisons with black and brown people. And now you're in there working and making a job for little and no money because now you're back in slavery. And these industries are making untold amount of money putting you in.
Mm,
I think it was Florida that was going to sue because they were going to sue Florida. Private industries were going to sue Florida because Florida was not maintaining a high incarceration rate.
Right.
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 They
Right.
wanted to ensure because if they're building these prisons and they like the minister said, they need somebody to fill those prisons. And so when they're filling these prisons, they're also filling jobs because they test them to figure out who can do what. So because so much money is being made by the prison industrial complex, they have to make sure that someone's going in. Foster children usually end up in prison. There's certain groups that end up in prison. If you have
Right.
poverty, foster children. If your parents are incarcerated, you have a higher rate of being incarcerated. All of these things they know are going to feed into that industrial complex. You think
Right.
stop their own business. They're going to make sure they always have somebody to go in. So you go
Yes,
from juvenile detention to adult prison.
And one of the things also when we look at when you talk about privatized prison is that because they're on Wall Street, they by law have to make a profit. And when we think about that, we have to think about just modern day slavery. And so, you know, that goes right on into the next chapter, which is talking about uh, employment, or really the lack of employment,
right.
being unemployed, because we have always been the first or the last hired and the first fired.